Hi, everyone. This is Becca Glenn. I'm the chair of the Legislative and Public Policy Committee for the Commission, and I'm here to give you a few brief instructions if you'd like to help out with an act supporting parents running for public office. So you might remember this bill from last session. We did a lot of work on the bill in the second half of the session, and we were somewhat successful in that the language did pass the Senate. It was passed as an amendment to the budget. However, when there was a conference committee, because the Senate budget and the House budget were not the same. And so what they do is then they have a conference committee to agree on one form that will become the final form that becomes law. And this language did not make it through that committee, and so it didn't become law. However, it did pass the Senate. And in the House, the bill made it successfully through two committees. It was election laws and steering and policy. And it was favorably reported out of both of those committees, and it was sent to a committee called Bills in the Third Reading, which is the last place that a bill goes before it would come up for a vote. And then we got to the end of the session, and they ran out of time, and it did not come up for a full vote. So both houses have vetted this bill thoroughly. They've done the work. It's gone through the committee process. And so what we are hoping to do in the early part of this session is to fast track the bill. So we're reminding them that last session, they might remember that they did this with the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It had gone all the way through the process in the last session. They didn't get it done. And so they really quickly in the spring, as soon as they'd gotten organized into committees and had a chance to hold a hearing, which they have to do, then they passed it, I want to say in about May or something. And so we are hoping to encourage them to do the same with this bill and to move it through the process and to bring up to them that there's no need for them or for us or for anybody else to repeat all the work that's already been done in the last session. So from the Commission's perspective, we're hoping to get this done quickly so that we can clear this off our plate and we can move on to other priorities. So the bill is SD 304 or HD 530. It's important that you include that D because the bills will eventually be given bill numbers. The D is for docket, so this is a docket number. And even when it is given a bill number, the legislative aid will still be able to look it up by the docket number, but they need to know that it's the docket number because S304 will be a different bill than FD304. So you don't get the same bill number. They assign them based on the committees that they go to and then their contiguous numbers for the committee. I don't know why. It's a somewhat stupid system, but that's just the way it is. So make sure that if it's a docket number that you have the D in there, and if it is not, that you don't have the D in there. So as some of you may remember from last year, this bill just specifies that if you are running for public office, then the extra childcare that you need while you're running for office is a campaign expense. So the funds that you raise from donors into your campaign account are allowed to be used for expenses that exist because of the campaign. They're not allowed to be used for personal expenses that you'd have to pay whether you run or running for office or not, like your rent. But they are allowed to be used for the campaign. And there's been many times where people were not allowed to use their campaign funds for childcare while they were campaigning because it was ruled a personal expense. So here in Massachusetts, the law is unclear. And so in my day job, when I work on campaigns, we've had a number of candidates go to the Office of Campaign and Political Finance, which administers campaign finance law for state and local office. And they said, it's unclear, so we don't recommend that you use the money for this purpose because it might be illegal and we just don't know. So this bill would clarify that indeed, while you are campaigning, the child care during that time is an expense that you wouldn't have if you weren't campaigning. And it also would bring state and local campaign finance law into line with federal campaign finance law. Because last year, the federal government ruled that for campaigns for federal office, which they oversee, this was a campaign expense and not a personal expense. So right now, if you run for Congress in Massachusetts, you may pay for the babysitter while you're at a campaign event or the extra day of daycare that you need. Maybe you were only at 3 before and now you need 4 for that extra day. You can pay for that out of the campaign funds that you've raised. but if you're running for state representative or if you're running for city council, you cannot. So clearly this is a barrier to parents with young children, particularly women, because we still do a disproportionate share of the child care, and to families that are low and middle income, because those families aren't going to be able to absorb that cost and pay it out of pocket. So in order to have a more representative governing bodies, this is a barrier that we would like to remove. So as you may remember, there are a lot of, and my slide will not go. You may, oh, there it goes. Okay, so as an individual or as a regional commissioner, there are a lot of things that you can do to help. You might remember from previous tutorials that I had mentioned that the thing that a legislator cares most about is what his or her constituents think about something. Because you are the ones who keep that person in their job or who take their job away from them. So I, as a state commissioner, can go and say, this is what we're hearing around the state. I can say, here's some technical information, but I will never be able to replace them hearing from their constituents that this is something that's important to them. So you are a really valuable resource in assisting us with getting this legislation through. And there's a number of ways that you could participate in doing that. So one thing that you could do is write a letter to the editor in your local paper. And as you see on the slide here, it's actually not that hard to get a letter to the editor published. You know, they're smaller papers and aren't getting such a volume that it is extremely competitive. So there's a pretty good likelihood that you can get it in there. And legislators do pay attention to their local media. If you call them by name, their staff definitely has a Google alert on their name. And so anytime their name appears, they're going to know and they're going to go look at what it is. And seeing that this not only informs the other people who read it, but also lets the legislator know that it's something that's important to their community and something that's being talked about in their community. When you're writing to the local paper, you also can take the local angle and use the argument or the story that is most resonant to people there. So should you want to write a letter to the editor, we have available a sort of how-to that you can get from the commission or that may be attached to the email that you received, if you received it. But in general, you're going to want to write a letter that fits the newspaper specifications. So you can find online on each newspaper what their requirements are for a letter to the editor. You can Google that. It's often on their website under either like the contacts tab or sometimes right on the letter to the editor page, and they'll give you a word limit and they'll give you a, where it needs to be submitted. Sometimes it's a web form, sometimes it's an email. And the word limit is usually in the 200 to 350 word range. So you don't have time to go on or 2 points, and then that's it. So we also at the commission have some example letters that you can use if you would really like to do this, but you just don't have the time to do it. We do that plenty of times. We ghostwrite the letter for somebody, and then that person, of course, if they're going to sign their name on it, can edit it in any way that they see fit and then submit it. So if that's an option you'd like to take advantage of, please just call the commission office, or you can write one yourself. If you are a regional commissioner, we recommend that you just sign your name and where you live and you don't use your title. Number one, because, legislators care most whether their constituents who are private citizens are engaged on this issue most anyway. And if you don't use your title, then it means you don't have to go through getting approval to speak on behalf of the commission. So if you really, really want to use your title for some particular reason, again, call the commission office. But we recommend that you don't use it and that you just sign your name as a private citizen and don't mention the commission at all. So you should only send the letter to one newspaper. They want original content. They don't want one that you've sent to 3 or 4 papers and that they might publish the exact same letter that another newspaper is publishing. But what you can do is get several different people to send unique letters on the same issue to a newspaper. If they get more than one letter on an issue, they're more likely to publish at least one of them. So even if it doesn't end up being your letter, you should consider yourself to have been part of that effort, because the more they get, the more they'll feel pressure to publish at least one of them. And sometimes they publish more than one. And then, of course, once it's published, you can feel free to send it right to your legislator, to share it on your social media, to take it to all of your friends, to, educate them about this issue, and maybe even get them involved and get them to contact their legislator. So here are some quick updates on what should go into the letter. Again, it's pretty brief. And if you need the file that has these in it, please let the commission office know. And here are some talking points to use. So first, as I already mentioned, if you run for federal office in Massachusetts, you can use campaign funds for this purpose, but not if you run for state or local. So that's fairly ridiculous, and this would also simply be bringing Massachusetts campaign law into line with federal campaign law. There's some fairly ridiculous as well as some good expenses that you can currently pay for out of campaign funds. For example, you can get a tuxedo dry cleaned for an event, but you can't pay the babysitter while you go to the event. So that seems to be an inequity, and not something that we want to continue doing. It seems to be an odd sort of cutout. Also, this impacts all parents who want to run for office, including men. I have worked in my day job with men for whom this was a problem, and that they had to figure out how to get additional childcare while they were campaigning. It does disproportionately impact women, but it applies to everybody. And this is a barrier to office. When you write a letter to the editor, it is most helpful if it is related to something that's already being talked about in the news, if it sort of piggybacks on that. And so there's a couple of ideas for how you can do that at this moment with this particular topic. One of which is, hey, there are all these women who recently got elected to Congress, and they're down in DC, and they're, making waves in a good way, and they're leading, and they're doing all of this good stuff. But here in Massachusetts, we still have this barrier. And if we want to enable everybody who has this passion and the smarts and all of these things to be able to get in and help us deal with the challenges that are before us as a Commonwealth, then we need to remove these barriers. And here's something that we should do. Another potential news hook would be, you might have seen that there were recently some articles that there were new appointments when the legislature organized itself into committees. And so it could be, hey, the session has started. We just saw this article that they're in committees now. They've organized themselves. And so now it's time to start passing legislation. And we think that the first thing should be this. And let me tell you why it's important. So those are two potential ways that you could make it a really timely and relevant thing, and then get into why you want this to be passed. Some other things that you can do, I'll go back to the talking points just so that you can look at those. Some other things you can do either as an individual or as a regional commission are meet with your legislator. You can do this in district. You do not need to come to Boston. In fact, often it's easier because legislators' days in Boston are typically crazy because they're trying to get everything done in the 2 or 3 days a week that they're in Boston. So most of them will be in the district Monday and Friday, if not more days, and you can meet with them there. You can go by yourself. You can go as a small group. And if you're not an experienced lobbyer and you'd like somebody from the state commission to come along with you as a backup, you can get in touch with the office, and we're happy to arrange for one of us to come and just be there in case you get yourself into trouble, need some assistance. But again, I would remind you that if they ask you something that you don't know, that's fine. The most important thing is that they know that you're a constituent and this is important to you. And if they ask a question you don't know the answer to, write it down and just make sure to communicate that to the commission office so that we can make sure to follow up and get them that information. You also can write or call. Both are really useful, and you can get others in your community to do the same. So a way that you might do that is perhaps print out the fact sheet about this bill, and when you're going to community meetings, either take a handful of cheapo postcards and talk to people about it. And if they are interested, ask them if they would sit there and write a postcard to their legislator, and then you can mail them all. Or you can say, hey, when you get home, will you call their office? So you can generate additional people to call and talk to their legislator. You can invite them to come with you to the meeting with the legislator. All of these things will be helpful in letting the legislator know that this is important to a broad range of their constituents. And so the final thing I want to leave you with is that if you want to know more about this, more than is in the tutorial or the written materials that the Commission Office has, either I or Liz Friedman, who is the Vice Chair of the Legislative Committee, would be happy to come to your next Regional Commission meeting and talk to you more about the bill and about the ways that you can support it by writing letters to the editor and calling and meeting and writing and getting others to do the same. So please just let the Commission Office know if you would like for one of us to come to your next meeting, and we will do our best, schedule permitting, of course, to accommodate that and to make that happen. We'd love to support the work that you're doing and to provide any information that would be helpful to you. So thank you so much, and until next time.